Okay, so I did my project on Twelfth Night, focusing on Viola. So just a little overview of Twelfth Night. It's a Shakespearean comedy about a twin, Viola, and her brother Sebastian, Viola disguises herself as a man and serves on Duke Orsino's court after being stranded in Illyria. And my kind of thesis statement is, in Twelfth Night, by disguising Viola as a man, Shakespeare gives her new freedom and allows her to be a complex and independent character with traits not usually seen in female characters in the period. So for a little background on the English Renaissance, which is kind of the period that Shakespeare wrote in, it lasted from around the late 15th century to the 17th century, and it marked a period of artistic revival due to increased literacy as well as rising political tensions. In concern of the arts, theater was a very popular form of entertainment during the English Renaissance. So while society was heavily divided by class, most people did go see plays in their free time, and that era was one of like an artistic revival, hence why it's the English Renaissance. The Twelfth Night holiday is a celebration marked on the sixth night after Christmas. It was a very rambunctious celebration. Sometimes men would dress as women and vice versa, and servants and masters would switch roles, which is obviously seen in the play. And then women in Elizabethan and the Jacobean eras had less rights than men and were not even allowed to perform in plays, which is just kind of interesting if you think about it, that in Twelfth Night, it's a man pretending to be a woman, pretending to be a man, so it's just kind of a little bit funny. And anyways, while women had new opportunities during the era, they were still forced to submit to patriarchy. So, I mean, there was a little bit of progression, but it was still very patriarchal. So to kind of get into the analysis, Viola is stranded in an unfamiliar place and decided that to guarantee her protection, she will disguise herself as a man and serve Duke Orsino. So she does give herself kind of a man's freedom that no other woman in her society could hold. She otherwise would have been victim to the whims of the men and the people around her. So she kind of gives herself that independence just by her disguise. So doing this, Olivia ends up falling for her, and she also becomes a favorite of Orsino. Orsino tells Viola, who he thinks is Cesario, he says, "All, if you will, for I myself am best when least in company. Prosper well in this, and thou shalt live as freely as thy lord, to call his fortunes thine." So this is kind of an example of Viola does get that freedom to, quote, live as freely as thy lord. That she would never have had if she hadn't disguised herself. So she kind of gets those freedoms and gets to be close to Orsino, which if she was a woman, she would not have obviously been able to serve on his court. So there's no telling what would have happened to her. She has new opportunities for social advancement, even in a completely new place, opportunities she would not have had as a woman on her own. And this is also proven in the immediate success of her brother Sebastian. He had much less fear when arriving in Illyria. He says, right when he gets there, he says, "I am not weary, and 'tis long tonight. I pray you, let us satisfy our eyes with the memorials and the things of fame that do renown this city." So he gets there, and he's immediately like, "Oh, let's go party, let's go see what the city has to offer us." Whereas when Viola arrived, she was scared, and she had to think of a way to protect herself. She didn't have time to explore the city. It's also, her situation is also in contrast to the situation of Olivia, who was left alone without her family as well, and she really didn't have many other options to do besides mourn and kind of lock herself up, which a similar fate would have happened to Viola, except she didn't even have like a castle to lock herself in. So it just proves that why she had to have the disguise and the freedom that her disguise allowed her. In Act 2, Scene 4, Viola defends her fellow women when Orsino claims, "There is no woman's side can bide the beating of so strong a passion as love doth give my heart. No woman's heart so big, to hold so much, they lack retention." So he's kind of saying that women can't feel emotions as strongly as men can, or he can specifically. And because Viola is disguised as a man, she gets to defend the emotional intelligence of women. No one would have listened to her if she was, if everyone thought she was a woman. So she says, "Too well what love women to men may owe, in faith they are as true as heart as we. My father had a daughter, loved a man as it might be. Perhaps, were I a woman, I should your lordship." So Viola loves Orsino, but she keeps her composure and she defends the emotions of women as she herself feels the strong emotions Orsino doubts women can feel. So she kind of hides that in saying, if I were a woman, I should your lordship. But it is kind of her true feelings, and, as we know, she is a woman. She does love Orsino. But she keeps her composure and she defends women, which is, again, something, an opportunity she wouldn't have had otherwise. So many characters in Twelfth Night are very fickle and they're very, silly, which is what makes the play so humorous. And that kind of contrast what is part of what makes Viola such a good heroine as well. So, for example, Orsino goes from infatuation with Olivia to Viola in a matter of seconds at the end. So he was pining for Olivia the whole time, but really there's not much evidence he really loved her. He kind of just really wanted to win her over. Another example is Olivia quickly changes her mournful attitude as she falls for Cesario immediately. And then after that, she falls for Sebastian even faster. She kind of gives up on Cesario and, obviously, but immediately goes to Sebastian. Malvolio is easily choked by Sir Toby and Maria, and he embarrasses himself in front of everyone. So Viola's contrast from these characters is what makes her a heroine. And she also remains steadfast in her sentiments throughout the play. So she tells Orsino, kind of in that same scene, in Act 2, Scene 4, she's talking about her sister, who has had this, great love when she's defending women's emotions. She says, she pined in thought, and with a green and yellow melancholy she sat like patience on a monument, smiling at grief. Was this not love indeed? We men may say more, swear more, but indeed our shows are more than will, for still we prove much in our vows, but little in our love. So, in some sense, Viola suggests the idea that Orsino really doesn't truly love Olivia, but is really just steadfast in the idea of loving her. Viola proves that she's strong as she watches her love chase someone else. She remains loyal to Orsino and stays in touch with her emotions despite the confusion of the events going around her. So she's independent, empathetic, smart, eloquent, and reflective. And she's the hero of the story. She's not the victim or the love interest, as seen in female characters of the time. So while everyone else is kind of silly, doing all this crazy stuff, moving from one fancy to another, Viola proves herself as a mature, stable character, which a lot of times women in this period were not seen as mature or stable. And so that kind of contrast proves Viola's character. Being disguised as a man, Viola is afforded independence she would otherwise not have. She was able to travel by herself and run errands for the Duke. She was valued for her skills and personality by the other characters, specifically Orsino and Olivia. While she was independent, though, which was positive compared to the traditional standards for women at the time, she was also very lonely. Despite being adored by Olivia and Orsino, neither truly knew her. Her thoughts and feelings in her true character were hidden by her disguise. So she always had to pretend to be someone she's not, which isolated herself from the others until, of course, everything is resolved at the end of the play. And again, during that same Act 2, Scene 4, she says, I am all the daughters of my father's house, and all the brothers too, yet I know not. So while her independence gives her freedom and opportunity, it is also isolating, especially because she thinks she lost all her family. She is all the daughters and brothers of her father's house. She thinks she's the only one. And that kind of just adds depth to her character as well. So, discussing modern sentiments, during Shakespeare's time, works were obviously often male-centered. A substantial heroine was few and far between. They definitely existed, but they were not nearly as common as now. So, for Viola, while she plays a man for most of the play, she's all in all an independent woman, which, again, as an archetype, Shakespeare's audience would not have seen very often. And she also assumes the male roles very easily. So she kind of proves that women are no lesser than men because everything that, a man would typically do, she does very easily, and she gets along pretty well, which is proven by her success. Many female characters of the time were purely love interests or victims, or they were overly emotional, or they were a seductress and they caused the male characters kind of downfall. Or other times they simply faded into the background. You can look back at some of the other stories we've studied this semester, and, Viola kind of sticks out through all of those. In modern times, a female main character is common, and many are more multifaceted and more admirable than even, Viola, but she obviously has her flaws. But despite this, she remains an interesting character and a nice change from female characters in many other works from the English Renaissance and previous. which is why Twelfth Night remains a favorite of modern audiences, and it's still performed today. Comparison to more modern media, gender-bending characters, as seen in Twelfth Night, would continue to appear the centuries following. A notable modern comparison is Disney's Mulan, which the story of Mulan is pre-Shakespeare, it's like ancient, but focusing on like the modern animated movie. Mulan, a girl disguised herself as a man to fight in a war and protect her father. So she, like Viola, falls for her superior, and she's similar to Viola in that she's an independent woman who, by pretending to be a man, proves that women can do anything men can. So she experiences similar struggles to Viola, and she similarly perseveres. She's a very strong character, as is Viola. And while it's not a retelling of Twelfth Night, it definitely is a modern example of another woman using male disguise and to get those freedoms and privileges only men were afforded in their societies, and they use that to their benefit. So in summary, Viola is allowed freedoms and traits unusual for women of time, especially as she is disguised as a man for much of the play. She proves the wit and intelligence of women through her actions, standing in contrast to other characters. In many other plays, the women are victims or love interests. Viola is neither. She is her own person who decides her own fate, taking her life into her own hands, a freedom only afforded to her as she frees herself from the limits put on women. This also is noted that she, saying that she's not the love interest, obviously she has a love interest, but she's kind of the one going for Orsino. Like, he's focused on somebody else until the very end. So she's kind of the one pursuing that love interest, which again is another example of her being much unlike many other female characters of the time. Shakespeare uses Viola's male disguise to allow for a smart and independent character, a rare occurrence for female characters of the time. So just my reflection statement. Throughout the project, I sought to analyze Viola as a character in the context of her time period. Through analysis of the text, as well as background knowledge of both historical and modern portrayals of the play, as well as, of course, historical background knowledge, and that's seen in the the photographs I used. There's a bunch of different historical, modern portrayals of the play, and you can kind of see the different ways that Viola is portrayed, both through the paintings and the photos and whatnot. My analysis seeks to understand Viola and her characterization by Shakespeare to understand her as a unique female character. And then for the discussion prompts, which character from Twelfth Night do you identify with most and why? And what do you think would have happened to Viola if she never disguised herself as a man? And yeah, there's my resources. Thank you so much.